The movie begins with Tug, a military medic, enjoying a swim near the Kajaki Dam in Afghanistan. Suddenly, an explosion startles him, and he immediately gets out of the water. Then, he confronts two local boys, one of whom is holding a rifle, but they just mock him. Tug tries to reason with them about the dangers of carrying guns and firing indiscriminately, but they pay no attention to his words. Soon, his colleagues arrive and advise him not to create trouble with the locals unless he's prepared for the consequences. They suggest he put on some clothes and move on. In an effort to make peace, they ask the boys for some fish, and surprisingly, they manage to get some. Later, a British Chinook helicopter carrying soldiers flies over the Kajaki Dam in Helmand Province. It lands near other British soldiers, who quickly load supplies and prepare for their mission. Following this, newcomers Prosser and Jonesy drive a military truck to deliver a package to their base. Along the way, they spot fellow soldiers, Jay, Tug, and Mark walking, and offer them a ride, but playfully drive off before the trio can join them. As they arrive at their barracks, the sergeant warmly welcomes them and helps unload the truck with packages. Mark introduces himself to the Jonesy, and they exchange short greetings and handshakes. Inside the barracks, the soldiers sort through their belongings before heading to their posts. Jay, a senior officer, takes Jonesy on a tour, showing him the barracks, the medics area, and the themed store. Jay also reveals that there are around 16 of them stationed there. Meanwhile, Tug, being the only medic in the group, checks a medical issue in Jonasy's lower body and, in return, receives 3 cans of fruit salad. Tug provides Jonesy with antibiotics and anti-inflammatory medication, advising him to take them regularly. As night falls, 2 soldiers inspect their surroundings and decide to keep watch. Unfortunately, they spot enemy activity at a nearby petrol station and prepare for an attack. As the enemy's group practices firing, the duo suspects them to be part of the Taliban terrorist group. One of the soldiers, named Jarhead, quickly wakes up their senior, Hale, as there's ongoing activity at the petrol station. Without wasting any time, Hale joins them and watches through the binoculars to locate the Taliban group. He tries to contact their comrades using the radio, but receives no response. Left with no options, he takes the risk and fires an emergency shot to alert them. Hale then requests the 3rd Battalion for air support. But unfortunately, their missile doesn't hit the target, and the terrorists quickly run away. The next morning, another officer, Pearson, spots Taliban through his binoculars, where a vehicle is being forcefully stopped by them. Hale suspects that it is an illegal checkpoint where terrorists are extorting money from civilians. Perhaps the same activity was being carried out last night. Meanwhile, the platoon from the 3rd Battalion is exercising together, preparing for their upcoming expedition. Some are following routines, while others are playing around. Tug and Jay entertain themselves by playing chess using water bottles. Next, Jarhead, Hale, and Foz get ready to head out and investigate the area where the Taliban has set up a roadblock. Their plan is to disarm and disperse the roadblock. The group then loads their bags with essential supplies and sets off on their exploration. Meanwhile, Jay and the rest of the team relax in their barracks. Upon reaching a specific location, the group splits up to carefully inspect their surroundings. They step forward cautiously, wary of the potential traps. Suddenly, there's a massive explosion when Hale triggers a landmine and gets blown away. The explosion severely injures him, taking off part of his leg and some fingers. Panicked, Jarhead rushes to Hale's side, trying to calm him down. The latter is in great pain, and his friends quickly try to stop the bleeding. Realizing that Hale may die without proper medical support, Jarhead calls for an emergency response through the radio. He then instructs Foz to go back and call for backup. On the other hand, Pearson and the platoon hear the explosion and try to contact Jarhead but receive no response. Concerned, Pearson and 2 others prepare to go and check on their mates. Similarly, a mile away, Mark also hears the explosion and orders the rest of the 3rd Battalion to look for their team. They gather essential tools and rush to the location of the mine strike to provide assistance. Despite the imminent danger, the soldiers remain determined to patrol the steep hill. Pearson encounters the rushing Foz, who calls for backup and informs them of the situation below. Upon hearing this, Pearson urgently gathers the remaining soldiers, and they make their way to help Hale. Meanwhile, a senior officer, John, arrives in his car and halts the rushing soldiers, offering them a ride to the mine strike location. Arriving at the steep hill, they are shocked by Hale's severe injuries. Wasting no time, Smudge promptly attends to Hale's wounded leg, while Pearson tries to distract him from the pain. As all this is happening, Hale abruptly asks Smudge to check if his wiener is still intact. The latter jokes, lightening the mood and informing him that he can still play with his little toy. After a while, Jay arrives and informs the group that Mark and his team have organized a rescue party. He also applies another tourniquet to Hale's leg, causing him to cry out in pain. In the next scene, Mark and Tug arrive with a stretcher to transfer Hale to a safer area. Tug administers more morphine to ease Hale's pain and instructs others to mark the dosage. Mark then assigns tasks to the other soldiers to transport Hale to a safer place. Following this, they all begin marking points on the ground, making a safe route to prevent any future explosions. As the team carefully attends to Hale's needs, adjusting his posture and providing support to carry him to another place, a soldier suddenly shouts that there is something hard in the ground. Fortunately, it turns out to be just a rock, bringing relief to everyone. Hale then requests a cigarette from Tug, and the rest of the patrol group clear the area to create a safe landing spot for the incoming rescue helicopter. Somehow, the group manages to carry Hale to the landing site they have prepared. And after receiving a radio message about the confirmation of the arriving help, Mark orders his men to leave and return to their quarters. Meanwhile, as Pearson walks back to his pals, he accidentally triggers another landmine. The explosion injures him severely, wounding both of his legs. He yells in pain and pleads for help, but the others can't risk approaching him due to the danger of another explosion. However, Mark and two soldiers cannot see Pearson suffering, so they act quickly and reach him. They apply a tourniquet to stop the bleeding and also inject him with a dosage of morphine to alleviate his pain. Moments later, help finally arrives. But it isn't the one that they are seeking for. A Chinook helicopter approaches to land a few meters away from their location. The soldiers know that it is dangerous to land such a huge helicopter there, so they signal the pilot to fly away. The dust blast makes it very difficult for the soldiers to breathe and contact the pilot, but in the end, the latter finally gets the message and flies away. Unfortunately, the helicopter's downdraft is so strong that it triggers another mine, injuring Mark with deep injuries on his arm, face, and chest. The soldiers cry out in agony, realizing that they are in deep trouble. Prosser is also one of those injured, but not severely. He bandages himself, and despite other soldiers asking him not to move, he cannot oversee Mark's severe condition and approaches him for help. Mark has been seriously wounded under his shoulder and is losing a lot of blood. To stop the blood flow, Prosser takes out some gun straps and begins wrapping it around the wound. He also gives a dose of morphine to Mark and suggests he keep calm and hold on to his breath. On the other hand, the only medic of the group, Tug, can't bear to see Mark suffer and decides to rush to his side. Other soldiers try to stop him as they fear that he might set off another mine, increasing the risk to all of them. But Tug ignores their warning, grabs his bag and begins throwing it on the ground before jumping on it, expecting an explosion that never comes. Despite Mark needing immediate attention, Tug is carefully making his way to him, seemingly regretting his sudden decision to risk his own life. Meanwhile, another injured soldier, Harvey, asks Jarhead to intubate him, as his right lung feels like it's collapsing. Harvey explains that he is having difficulty in breathing and that the procedure is vital to save his life. He also instructs Jarhead to insert the tube right below his second rib so that he can breathe. It has already been 3 hours and still the rescue helicopter has not arrived. While Tug is on his way to Mark, the latter asks for water and the soldiers in a safer location throw bottled water. Ken safely catches the first bottle, but sadly, when he tries to catch another, he accidentally steps on a mine, causing an explosion that destroys his foot. After a while, Tug finally approaches the injured soldiers and helps Mark, before administering morphine to Ken and applying a tourniquet to stop the bleeding from his leg. The soldiers are in need of an immediate rescue, but sadly haven't received any news of an incoming helicopter or team. Meanwhile, Hale blames himself for the platoon's tragic situation, mentioning that he is the one who suggested they investigate the previous night's incident. However, his comrades reassure him that it's not his fault at all. Hale then asks Smudge to name his future child if something happens to him, but Smudge refuses. He reassures his friend that they will definitely get out from this deathbed. As time passes, no help arrives, but the 3rd Battalion stays distracted by talking about their lives and sharing memories. Mark feels thirsty and begins telling Tug his last messages to his family, fiancé, and even dog. He then mentions that his body is getting cold and that he cannot hold on any longer. Hearing this, Pearson and Tug encourage him to hold on, but Mark ignores their words and continues to share his final words. Suddenly, they hear the sound of an approaching chopper, but the soldiers warn the pilot to stay away from the minefield. But despite this, the rescue soldiers drop down the helicopter using harness ropes to help the injured one and bring everyone to safety. They prioritize the heavily wounded ones, from Pearson to Hale, and transfer Mark's body to a stretcher before loading them onto the helicopter. As the medics are also present in the chopper, they can now properly treat their wounds and know their exact situation. Sadly, Mark doesn't make it and dies before reaching the hospital, and the injured soldiers also struggle to survive. The movie ends with a heartwarming message to all the soldiers who lost their lives in such dangerous situations while serving in Afghanistan.